Hey everybody, welcome to another video review. I know I haven't done one of these in a while. First, I sometimes get distracted playing my video games. I've been doing the Killzone Shadowfall speedruns for a while, and I've kind of taken a break from that. I might go back to that later on, but you know, I got a little bit burned out on that. And then the PS5 got released, and one of the exclusives for the PS5 is a game called Demon's Souls Remake. And this was my first so-called Souls game. The Souls games have been around for quite a while, for I think the better part of seven years. And it's kind of taken the video gaming world sort of by storm. It's a very popular series of games. And the original developer from FROM Software has made quite a lot of them. Like, you know, after Demon's Souls, they made the Dark Souls trilogy, Bloodborne, Sekiro, so they've done quite a bit. They're very popular, very good games. This was my first one. The graphics are outstanding. I might do like a PlayStation 5 mini review, maybe a little bit later on. But there's so much content out there that's talking about the PS5. I feel almost like it's a little bit, I guess, superfluous for me to get too much into that. But I don't know. I mean, since I'm doing this channel for myself, maybe I'd be interested a few years from now or 5 years from now to see my I guess original thoughts or my initial thoughts on a new generation of video game systems. But in any case, I've been playing Demon's Souls for a while. As you can see, I've uploaded some really nice Demon's Souls content, and it's really cool because the PS5 is powerful enough that it allows you to save directly to the hard drive, up to like an hour at a time. And then you can upload directly to YouTube from the PlayStation 5, so I don't have to like use a capture card and transfer to the computer and upload it that way, which is sort of a drag, you know, that I had to do that with some of my speed runs, for instance, for Killzone Shadowfall. So anyways, I've been distracted on that end, but fear not, I always go back to making some videos. I have some special ones coming up a little bit later on. I don't want to spoil it, but I do have some pretty nice stuff coming up that I like to talk about and kind of showcase. But for today, I like to take an opportunity to do a couple more reviews of some game books I've read. So far, the only game books that I reviewed on this channel have been the ones by Jonathan Green, which, you know, I love. I'm eagerly awaiting the Dracula one, and that's been delayed a little bit because of the unfortunate and tragic passing of the artist that was commissioned to draw for that project. So, you know, of course, condolences, you know, to his family and friends. It's a very unfortunate event. And so because of that, there has been a delay. But I love Jonathan Green's work, and I reviewed that. I also have actually all of the Fighting Fantasy game books ever written. All the way to, I think, the most recent one, which was written by Rhianna Pratchett, the daughter of the late, great Terry Pratchett. The cover is a little bit more, I think, geared toward children, and it seems like the tone under Scholastic has moved a bit more toward, I think, something that's going to appeal more to kids. Not like the original Fighting Fantasy weren't for children, but I think, you know, maybe the difficulty and just the overall tone of the books is more toward children. So I have all of those, and I have, of course, all of the Lone Wolf game books as well. All the collector's editions, all the way up to the most recent one, which is 26, and I also own 29, 30, 31. They did a little bit out of sequence. And so I'm eventually, I guess, planning on doing reviews for all of those. Those are the kind of the game books of my childhood that I really enjoyed. And it's kind of amazing to me because if you do a little bit of research, there's actually so many game books out there in the vein of Fighting Fantasy game books. A lot of them are, I think, you know, published by smaller publishers, or they're like online only or something like that. But the sort of the ambition of those books I've completely missed out on. Like, you know, some of the really, really good ones that are more geared toward adults, that kind of bypassed me completely. So I've been sort of rediscovering some of them. And so for the purpose of this review, I'd like to just take the time to talk about a series of books called the Critical Interactive Fiction books, or the Critical IF books. And they're written by a guy named Dave Morris. And I think they were initially published under like a different insignia or a different series, like called Virtual Reality. But then I think they rebranded it because they didn't want it to be confused with, like, you know, real virtual reality, which is like more of a video gaming phenomenon and that type of thing. And so these books were all written quite a long time ago. If you're looking at the publication date or the copyright date, these were initially published by a publisher called Reed Consumer Books, all the way back in 1993. So he wrote he wrote more than four, but these were the four that were kind of like rebranded in 2013. But these are the four books that are widely available at Amazon.com. So I'm going to show you this one by one. So this is Down Among the Dead Men, and then The Necklace of Skulls, Once Upon a Time in Arabia, and The Heart of Ice. So these are the four books that were republished in 2013. Two of them, Down Among the Dead Men and Necklace of Skulls, were both written and published originally in 1993, and then the other two, Once Upon a Time in Arabia and Heart of Ice, were published in 1994, a year later. So they were both written and published very close to each other, okay? So the reason I actually found out about these books was actually because of Jonathan Green. I was trying to kind of puzzle out a certain solution for Alice's, I think, adventure in Wonderland and all that. That was Jonathan Green's first game book. And while I was trying to puzzle out one of the solutions, I went online to one of those forums. It's a game book forum, interactive fiction forum. And while I was there, there was an offhand comment about how, one of the players I really enjoyed the Jonathan Green Alice game book, and he made mention of a book called Heart of Ice, which he said was one of the best game books he had ever read. And one of the people who frequented these forums, I think his name is Silas or Silvas, he agreed heartily. Now these are people whose opinions I kind of respect, as I've been reading the forums, and I was like, well, if they both think that this is one of the greatest game books ever, I felt like I owed it to myself to at least read it. So I bought Heart of Ice by itself, and then I read it. I did enjoy it quite a bit, and so based on that, I looked around and I bought the other three books that were available, and I got those. So that's how I started off on this. So I wanted to just kind of spend my time talking about these books, mainly for myself and for people who are interested in what I think. So here goes. I was thinking about maybe doing a video for each book separately, like I did for Jonathan Green's series, but I don't know if there's enough content to really justify that. So I figured I'll just make kind of a longer review and just go through all of them. So here are the basics of these Critical IF series. So this is read very much like a choose your own adventure. And I think this is closer to choose your own adventure than Lone Wolf or Fighting Fantasy, mainly because the way these books are structured, the way these game books are made, there's no randomness to it really. In other words, for Fighting Fantasy, Lone Wolf, and some of the other game books, and in fact, Dave Morris himself wrote a series, The Fabled Lands, which does require dice. But for this series of books, he decided not to include that mechanic. So there's no element of really randomness. You don't roll dice, you don't fight combats in the traditional sense. It very much reads like a choose your own adventure. We're going through the adventure and you're progressing through the game book purely on your choices. And the choices ideally would be rational in nature. You have to use logic, you have to use problem solving. Sometimes you have to guess, you have to be a little bit lucky, but there will be multiple paths that take you through the books. But rather than using dice and having, say, sections where you're actually fighting monsters by rolling dice, what Dave Morris did is that he gave you certain skills. And each character would start the adventure with 4 skills. And for instance, let's start with, since we might as well just get started, we'll start with Down Among the Dead Men. So for instance, for Down Among the Dead Men, you have 12 potential skills, which range from agility, brawling, charms, cunning, folklore, marksmanship, wilderness lore, swordplay, streetwise spells, seafaring, roguery. And each of these skills kind of comes with these things that you can use and sprinkle throughout the adventure when you find yourself in various situations, which occur very quickly, very often. You will be asked to use these skills to progress through the game. And obviously, depending on whether you have them or not, since you can only choose 4 of them, that will determine what happens, okay? So this is kind of like an interesting way of crafting a game book. Again, you're not actually fighting, you're not rolling dice, there's no element of randomness. It's all literally based on decision making and then whether you have a skill or not and how you create a character with that number of skills. You do have life points, you do have money to use as needed, and you do have different items and possessions that come in and out of your character that you can use later on. And so that kind of is what kind of gives these playthroughs a little bit of variety. So starting with Down Among the Dead Men, and by the way, all of the books are fashioned along those lines. And in fact, things like Streetwise or Roguery or Cunning make their appearance through sometimes all 4 books. Now, certain books have unique skills, you know, just for that book, but there are also a lot of skills that, again, make an appearance in all of the books. So starting with Down Among the Dead Men, this is an adventure sort of in the vein of Pirates of the Caribbean, obviously. And the premise is that, you know, you are I guess an indentured servant, you're like a slave that was captured by pirates, and then you escape from the main bad guy, the main pirate. His name is Scarvench. And it just talks about your quest to, first of all, escape him, and then to later on exact your revenge on him. I guess this is a good time to mention that I am going to talk about spoilers. I don't feel like I can really review these books effectively without spoiling, you know, the important parts of it. So you being forewarned that there will be some spoilers that sprinkle through as I talk about each book. So in terms of Down Among the Dead Men, I enjoyed all of these books, of course. My favorite remains The Heart of Ice, but there are some of the books that come awfully close to Heart of Ice, and Down Among the Dead Men is really close. I mean, I would consider it almost as good, if not, yeah, it would be very close. I think like it would be 1A, 1B. I really enjoyed this one. I think that one of the things that sort of distinguishes Dave Morris from maybe other authors is that while his books are like choose your own adventure style, he writes with a lot of, he just writes in a very mature fashion, and I think the quality of his prose and the quality of his kind of character development and plotting is very, very good. Probably as good as some of the best fighting fantasy authors. And I definitely feel like his writing is geared toward a much older audience. You know, and he does a lot of research. So for instance, in Down Among the Dead Men, there's a lot of references to sort of, you know, pirate lore, historical precedents for pirates, some of the nautical terms, and some of the terms that, you know, you would find on a ship. It definitely show that he did a lot of research into that. He also did a lot of research into, you know, myths, very popular myths and folk tales of the 7 Seas, and he incorporates it into the writing. So the adventure Down Among the Dead Men is sort of split into 2 main parts, and I think it integrates really nicely with the adventure he's trying to tell. And the first part has you and 3 other companions escaping from the pirate Scarvench, and it just basically talks about this, the story at that point is about sort of this desperate struggle to survive as you are trying to run away from him on this little tiny rowboat, you know, that you're stealing from, that you stole from him. And there was a lot of tension. It was really well done. You could choose multiple ways of trying to escape, multiple ways on the sea, and each one of them would branch and give you a lot of really cool adventures. And during that time, you can pick up certain items that might be of great use to you later on. And so there's just a really large variety of encounters depending on what you choose. So by the way, you know, when I read these books, when I review these books, I go through every single path. So I wind up, I mean, for instance, this book has 427 sections. And so I'm pretty sure I've read through almost all of them by just going through every branch. I'm very completist in that respect. I do like to see what every different option will lead to, even the bad ones. So I'm pretty sure I've been pretty thorough with each one of these books. And so again, that first segment when you're trying to escape him and you're trying to get to this port is an amazing adventure. I mean, it's really, really good. All of the encounters are pretty distinct, and depending on what choices you make, you go through very distinct encounters, which can give you very distinct items and treasures, which could be used later on. Now, once you finally make it to the port, the adventure enters into a second stage where you've escaped Scarbench, but now you are in more of a position to create problems for him, and you're trying to get revenge for what he did to you. And there, it branches into a subplot to try to foil his plans to kidnap the queen, which is sort of the overarching, I guess, goal of Scarbench. You kind of figure out all sorts of little tiny secrets, and there's a lot of different ways of beating the pirate. And it actually goes from there all the way to the final battle. I think the pacing for Datum and the Dead Men is fantastic. It's a really long adventure, and I'm just amazed that he's able to fit so much into 427 sections in this case. And it doesn't feel too hurried, meaning that depending on your choices, you may have to go through several intermediary steps to get to where you want to go, but it kind of takes its time getting there, and you do feel like the passage of time is organic, and you feel well rewarded for the time you took to get to the end. So I won't spoil more than that, other than to say that this is definitely one of my favorites of the series, and it's one of the better, I think, choose your own adventure games that I've ever read. Again, there's some vocabulary he uses that I had to check up, especially in nautical terms. He uses code words like detrude or piquant to talk about the quality of your raft or whether it's falling apart or not. Just really, really wonderful language. He writes with a lot of assurance. So it was a joy to read. And again, I always have to kind of make a distinction between books like this and game books like Lone Wolf or Finding Fantasy that has more of a gaming quality to it. This one, for sure, you can enjoy just reading it in bed. You just have to remember certain code words. So, Dave Morris, I just call him Dave for now. So the author, he does sprinkle little code words, and those code words will guide you as you read the sections and branch you into different sections, because those code words will change the adventure, change the scenario. Like, he'll say, well, if you barely escaped, I guess, from Eldraku, the pirate vampire or something like that, then, record this code word on, your sheet to remember it. And if later on you go into a section and he'll say, if you have this code word, turn to this section. If not, turn to this section. That's his way of, again, individualizing each path depending on, what you have done before. So some of his code words are actually, pretty sophisticated in terms of the language. So in any case, Datum and the Dead Men, definitely one of the better books. And it's based on, again, the kind of the Pirates of the Caribbean, pirate lore, great adventure. Now I'm going to follow this up with what I consider one of the weakest or my least favorite books in the series. Not to say it's a bad book, but of the four, I think it is the weakest, and that is Once Upon a Time in Arabia. This was written in 1994, so ironically it was written after Datum and the Dead Man and Necklace of Skulls. And Once Upon a Time in Arabia obviously draws upon for inspiration the myths of the 1001 Nights. And you start off as a guy who basically runs afoul of this corrupt vizier, and he's named Jafar, of course he is. And it's sort of interesting because you run afoul of him, but the way Dave decides to craft the adventure and give you the motivation to go on the adventure is actually quite simple, in the sense that you are expected to go and tell the caliph or the sultan or the king. In this book, it's called the caliph. And you're supposed to tell him, like, hey, your vizier is a villain and, is going to try to backstab you. He's a horrible person. And that's really all there is. Like, you don't have much agency as a character, in the sense that you're not going to kill Jafar. You're not going to, overcome him or beat him. Like, you're literally there to essentially tattletale on him and just basically tell the caliph, he's a bad guy. And then the idea there is that why should the Caliph listen to you, right? You're like a nobody. You're like penniless because Jafar stole everything from you in the beginning. And so the primary framing device then is that you're supposed to go on an adventure and basically accumulate wealth and power so that you re-enter the city of Baghdad now as a person of some worth, so that the Caliph will actually listen to you. Which is kind of interesting. I mean, believe it or not, I actually, well, it's not too much of a stretch to believe this. Was a really big fan of fairy tales. I mean, when I was growing up, especially, in my early teen years, I like to say I probably read almost every type of fairy tale that was out there. I read all of Andrew Lang's, colored fairy tale books, and folklore from all the different cultures and stuff like that. And I actually, spent the time reading the entire 1001 Nights, all of the Arabian tales, non-abbreviated. I got the whole thing. Okay, I didn't just read the best ones. I read every single story. Now, I don't remember any of them. I read them, of course, when I was only like 14 or something like that, 13, 14, many, many decades ago. Maybe that was a framing device in a lot of those stories. I don't know. A lot of those Arabian Night stories kind of tend to become very similar after a while. But I just think this is kind of an interesting framing device for a story where you're not given, your goal is not to defeat him directly, but you're just trying to get wealthy or rich enough so that the Caliph will actually take what you're saying seriously. I find that very interesting. So then after that, you branch out and you start basically, getting into all sorts of shenanigans and adventures, essentially just to gain money, like power, money, and whether you do that by going over the land, by seeking your fortune, or by going onto the sea, it branches and it comes back together again like it does for all of these adventures. And then you eventually get to the end where you have enough power to confront Jafar directly in front of the Caliph. And then the story will change depending on what you've brought with you to the fight. I think the good part about it is that, as usual, he does a lot of research. Mr. Morris does a lot of research, and his writing style is very distinct, meaning like the way, like the overall feeling you get when you're reading Datum and the Dead Man is definitely like, it feels like it's a pirate story, and the way he writes, it has a very distinct, unique feel. And when he writes Once Upon a Time in Arabia, again, he definitely does like an amazing job of drawing you, excuse me, drawing you into the world and the setting that he places it. So when I read this, I definitely felt like I was reading one of the Arabian Tales from the 1001 Nights, in terms of the culture, the description, the setting, the dialogue is very, very well done. Okay, I just didn't like this as much because I felt that the encounters and the story wasn't quite as memorable as, for instance, the other books. It was just these kind of random. Excuse me. It was a lot of these random, disconnected adventures. I could see the areas where he took inspiration from the Arabian Nights, but none of those inspirations were allowed to breathe. In the original 1001 Tales, one story would go on for 20, 30 pages. There would be stories within stories. There was a lot more, development in terms of the genies and those situations. And even though you definitely kind of felt him taking that source material, and you can tell that he researched the Arabian Nights, it just felt like a kind of a disjointed sequence of adventures, and I just felt like I was jumping from one like mini tale to another, like, oh, this is the one where it's based off of Alibaba with Open Sesame. It's like, okay, that's one little story, but you're there for like literally 2 sections and then you're gone. There was nowhere for the story to sort of breathe and develop organically, like with Datum and the Dead Man, where you were following it for a while. You're just whisked from, like adventure to adventure to adventure. Each adventure would just be a few sections long. You can see clearly the inspiration for the adventures from the Arabian Nights, but that was it. And so again, I felt like the different encounters didn't have as much character, didn't have as much depth And so I can't even remember, or I remember very, very like vaguely those sets of encounters. And I think that kind of shows that's a little bit of a failure in terms of making an impression. But the writing quality and the research into the setting is still top notch. I just felt like the framing device for the story and the quality of the individual encounters was a little bit lacking. All right, so that's Once Upon a Time in Arabia. Still very, very good, but compared to the other work, not quite as good. So now I'm going to go into the book Necklace of Skulls. I wonder if this was the first book he wrote. I mean, it was either Datum and the Dead Men or it was this book. Both were written originally in 1993. Or maybe the first book he wrote in this series wasn't even republished. Maybe they didn't publish the crappier ones. They only published the good ones. But Necklace of Skulls is actually a very unique book. It is based, so just like Once Upon a Time in Arabia, right, is the 1001 Nights, and Datum and the Dead Men is Pirates of the Caribbean. This book is actually very unique. It's based on the Mayan culture, and there's not a lot of game books you can imagine that's based on that. I think this is the first one I've ever read, and certainly the first one I've ever heard of. Okay, so number one, very, very unique setting, and he did, per what Dave Morris normally does, an incredible amount of research. This is fantastic. When I read this book, I really felt like I was reading like a Mayan fairy tale, and he put so many details of the gods and goddesses the Mayans worshipped. I mean, in case you don't know, there was human sacrifice involved in Mayan culture, and he didn't shy away from that. It's like an integral part of their religion. It was very vivid. When he used to describe all these different gods. There's multiple gods that's sort of presented in the story, but they're very vivid, and when you're reading it, you really feel like you're in the city, you're walking through the city. Masterful prose, okay, masterful prose. And in a sense, no, I think I have to say Dave Morris is definitely, I'm comfortable saying he's definitely the best author I've ever read in terms of, again, the sophistication of the language, the prose. He's magnificent. And so when you're reading it, again, he just draws you into that setting. You feel like you are that Mayan warrior having those adventures happen to you. And I learned so much about, again, Mayan myth and, Mayan culture, even though, of course, this is just a game book. If you really want to delve deep, you have to do a lot more reading. But just with this game book, I got so much out of that, and that's a testament again to Dave's writing quality, writing ability. Everything, the food, the costumes, the celebrations, the details of the human sacrifice, the details of it's just fantastic. So I'll go through by giving you the premise of the book, which is that you find that your twin brother, in fact, has been lost and likely killed by a wizard. And the wizard's name is Necklace of Skulls. This one I felt was like a little bit cheesy. I didn't really like the name. You couldn't have come up with a better name than Necklace of Skulls. I didn't love that decision, but okay, whatever, you have to accept it. So the name of the book is basically the name of the bad guy. He very likely killed your brother, but you don't know, and so you're going to try to travel from where you start in your city all the way to confront the Necklace of Skulls in his domain, in his temple. And that temple, just like all the best fairy tales, like east of the sun and west of the moon, the temple is like out in the middle of nowhere, the edge of reality practically. And you have to have this epic quest to get there, okay? So that's the premise of the book, and it follows your path and your adventures as you're traveling to get to the Necklace of Skulls. And then once you get to Necklace of Skulls, to defeat him, or it, we don't really even know the gender of this thing, but you want to defeat him, let's just say, and then you find out what happened to your brother. And the branches basically determine how you get there. So what choices you make will determine how you get there. And so there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can go overland, or you can go to the underworld. And it's almost like when Hercules went to the land of Hades, or all of these myths, where the hero has to go to the land of the dead and back out again. That's what this book is about. So you can go through that, It almost feels like two different adventures completely, depending on whether you choose to go into the underworld route or you choose to go through the overworld route. And if you're going overworld, the path branches even more, and there's different adventures you can use on the overworld route. It's a very complicated adventure. It feels very, very long, and I went through all the different paths, and I really feel like I played like two completely separate and distinct game books. And one where you find out so much about, again, kind of the Mayan way of life and their mythologies. And the other one is like the different aspect of Mayan mythology where you're learning about, again, their religion and their, the way the dead is processed and the souls, how are the souls divided. And it's like fantastic stuff. And he squeezed it just feels so dense. He squeezed so much, adventure and so many references. It's almost like a little bit overwhelming. There's just so many things to talk about. So again, this is fantastic. You have one good ending where you actually have a chance to resurrect your brother and get your brother back. And they have another ending where you persevere, you triumph, but you triumph alone, you don't get your brother back. And getting your brother back is actually really difficult. You have to get a lot of things right. You have to get certain items in order to get him back. It's definitely well-deserved. And so again, this is a fantastic book. I would say one of my favorites, and letting you kind of delve into a mythology and into a setting that you never ever get. And it's very focused on that. So I thoroughly enjoy this book. And if this is the first book he wrote, it's an amazing book, actually, for this series. So Necklace of Skulls, Mayan mythology, he did a phenomenal job doing, pulling into the setting. And also, again, unlike Once Upon a Time in Arabia, the story is like, burned in my mind. Like, it left a great impression. I remember it very, very well. And again, it felt epic. Okay, like Down Among the Dead Men felt epic. It felt long, deserved, multiple parts. Necklace of Skulls, it feels epic. You really feel like you journeyed a great amount. The passage of time, you feel that. And again, I remember the story, sort of the plot outline, very, very well. So definitely fantastic. So now I'm going to end on probably the best of the bunch, which is saying quite a lot, and that is Heart of Ice. This is the book that started me on this series of books, and it's really hard to review. The scope of this novel is so amazing. So essentially, it starts off with a little bit of a MacGuffin. You overhear some conversation that talks about this object called the Heart of Ice, which is this MacGuffin that can essentially destroy or save the world. The setting, so whereas you have pirate setting, Arabian Nights setting, Maya mythology setting, this setting is post-apocalyptic, futuristic, post-apocalyptic Earth, kind of like Mad Max, situation, Mad Max, post-apocalyptic settings. And that's where it starts. And without getting too deep into it, it takes you on this incredible adventure to the Heart of Ice. And it feels, again, like you're in this epic journey that goes on forever. It only has 454 sections. Not that many. It's beefy, but the average fighting fantasy book has 400 sections, for instance. So 454 is beefy, it's significant. But again, within this 454 sections, he takes you everywhere through like this post-apocalyptic Earth, through a desert setting, into a maze at the dilapidated ruins where the climax of it occurs. He takes you through to pyramids, a pyramid setting. He takes you through post-apocalyptic shanty towns and cities. You'll go into outer space, depending on what you choose. You'll go through a jungle. It's just like shocking how many settings he's able to take you through. It's like so rich, and there's such a great variety of encounters. There's so many ways of getting to the end, And of course, it ends with one of the most amazing climaxes I've read, a very heroic thing that it ends on. Again, I won't spoil too much of that for you. Even though I said I would spoil it, I decided I think I can do a good enough job without doing that. You meet really interesting characters that are, again, burn your mind. He uses the code words to create very good puzzles. You can use a sword, a knife, lasers. This thing's got it all. It's insane how much stuff is in it, and it's just perfectly plotted, amazingly written. All of his books actually are written very, very well, but I think Heart of Ice does take the cake in terms of, again, of the sophistication of the language. It was so good that I almost felt like it would be enough to, like, you might even be able to publish it and have it do pretty well, even as not like, without it being a game book. Like, it's not a game book, it's just a regular story. And that's like the highest praise I can offer, because like in almost all instances, these game books, they're only they only take you so far. I mean, they're there for you to, choose your own adventure, and you're supposed to have a good time figuring out where you're supposed to go, what you're supposed to do. This is not like, Shakespeare here, right? It's not Pride or Prejudice. This is not like a great novel. It's only supposed to give you characterization and plotting and story, insofar as the basic setup for you to have a fun time and just basically choose. And so it doesn't get very deep, right? By the very constraints of the genre, by the constraints of a choose your own adventure game book, where you are the hero, it just can't get there. But Dave Morris gets about as close as you can get to writing compelling characters and compelling fiction, where you almost feel like you're in the middle of a story. And that's what, of course, all of the game books aspire to. But this is like done, this is like he put on his big daddy pants. This is done like legit, very, very close. And I think he actually does succeed with Heart of Ice, making me feel as if I'm part of this amazing story. So in general, again, these are the 4 books: Heart of Ice, Necklace of Skulls, Datum and the Dead Man. My clear favorite is Heart of Ice. My clear least favorite, is Once Upon a Time in Arabia. But Datum and the Dead Man and Necklace of Skulls are really close. And if Heart of Ice is like, say, an A+, like Necklace of Skulls and Datum and the Dead Man are like high A. I mean, these 3 books, these 3 are really, really good. And this is like not horrible. It's decent, but these 3 are next level. I had a great time reading all of them. All of them kept me up past my bedtime. I think for Datum and the Dead Man, I stayed up until 3 in the morning reading that. And Necklace of Skulls and Heart of Ice, I was definitely up until like midnight, 1, 2 in the morning. So again, really, really pleased with them. And all of them have very sort of similar, game mechanics. Again, based predominantly and centered around making good choices, using hints, using logic, using rationale, using the combination of the 4 skills that you have to choose in the beginning, using them well, and then using code words to intertwine and mix from right to left all these choices. And he does balance it out very well, so that in general, no matter what combination of skills you're choosing, and no matter what paths you take, as long as you have a little bit of luck and you utilize good common sense judgment, you're going to be able to win through in the end. So it's actually very impressive how he balances all of the paths out, so you can get to where you need to go and still win. Whereas I think some of the other series, especially some of the fighting fantasy books, feels like a cheat almost, where it just feels like you have to get really lucky, or it's too harsh, where it's just like, if you make one mistake, you miss one item, you will never get to the end, you have to start over again. And I think Jonathan Green, in some of his younger days, did create certain adventures that was a little bit unbalanced in that respect. So anyways, this is the critical interactive fiction, critical IF series of books. There's only 4 of them. You can still get them on Amazon pretty easily, and I do encourage you to check them out. They are some of the best interactive fiction books I've ever read. Okay, thanks very much for sticking with me for this 40-minute review. But remember, I reviewed 4 books in 40 minutes, so it's not too bad. It winds up about 10 minutes a book. And until next time, do take care.